Hey everyone, welcome back to the tavern. We're glad you can join us for this week's episode. You know, Jack, American diplomacy has been on the decline for years and years. We're still the most powerful country in the world, but we're being tested every day by adversaries that want to see the United States fail. You know, for years and years, the United States has been the world police. Every time a country needs us, we're there to support them. And most of the time, from what we can see, is we don't get anything in return. I mean, anytime a country needs us, we'll be there to support them financially and militarily. And our leaders always say we do it for our safety, and that's why we help everyone. But there are a few countries out there that want to replace us as the world police. And there's three of us that are giving us a run for our money right now. They're Russia, China, and Iran. And over the next three podcasts, we're going to be breaking down each one and tell everyone why we feel they're a threat to our safety and security. So today we're going to get into Iran. So Jack, you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'm going to start off with my opening statement, which has nothing to do with Iran. It has what's going on at home. But I wanted to introduce a special guest we have here today, my sister Margaret.
Hello, Margaret.
She's got to drink a glass of wine with us. We got our drinks.
Cheers.
All right, cheers. That's Margaret's philosophy. Apparently, it's wine o'clock here. All right, so I'm going to start off by saying we want to remind you how we explain how our leaders, they rule by emotions and mostly our emotions. And here's a few examples. This week we had Representative Maxine Waters goes to Minnesota and speaks to a crowd. Now, first of all, these are not the people she represents. All right? She's acting like things are going really good in California, and she has the extra time to travel around the country and help other representatives. If I was a representative of Minnesota, I would ask her to leave, go take care of your own problems. So, first off, she comes out of California. Instead of taking care of her own shitstorm that she's got over there with homeless and people leaving because of high taxes and crime going through the roof. And she should be there working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to get that straightened out, but she decides to go to Minnesota. She goes to Minnesota, first off, and speaks to a crowd after the...
Derek Chauvin.
What?
The Derek Chauvin trial?
Yeah, they have a, you're not allowed out after 10 o'clock, and she speaks to the crowd after 10 o'clock for the curfew. So right at the beginning, as soon as she lands, she's breaking the law. Then she continues to say that if she doesn't like the verdict of this trial, that this crowd should stay in the streets and cause disruption. She's calling for violence. And what she said influenced the jury. No matter what you'd like to say about it, she's going to cause a this case to go back to trial, probably in front of the Supreme Court, because she's a genius. And like we talked about empty suits being experts, she's the emptiest suit, least amount of expert. The second one was Chris Cuomo. I noticed him. I don't know if this guy has any brains in his head. Talking about the killing of kids. In particular, he's saying that the United States doesn't care that black kids are getting killed. That if you started killing white kids, there'd be a problem. Could you imagine the Cuomo's talking about people dying on their watch? I mean, if he was so worried about people dying, he would talk to his brother, the governor of New York, who his policy is responsible for thousands of people dying. So, but Chris Cuomo, you really don't care about black children getting killed, and I don't understand why you would talk about children getting killed in the streets anyway. Because if you were worried about it, you'd be worried about all the kids. You'd be talking about the young kid that got killed in Brooklyn going to a family barbecue in Brooklyn. You'd be talking about the 6-year-old that's going to a drive-thru in Chicago and gets killed in the backseat of their car, the family car, where the father gets wounded seriously and the child gets killed. So where's your outrage on that one, Mr. Cuomo, another expert? You know, you have regular violence going on in the streets, and he never covers it. You know, I don't know about your family, but we try not to talk about kids getting killed in the streets. You know, especially when your brother has so much responsibility. Now, they're talking about, again, we talked on the last podcast to really watch out what the news doesn't report, because that's the hardest one to keep track of. And NBC was a perfect example of it in the last shooting we had in Ohio, where a young girl got killed by a police officer. He had 9 seconds to respond to violence that was going on, and apparently there was a young girl getting ready to stab another young girl in a dispute in the middle of the street, and she had gotten killed. So, again, NBC News doesn't cover the knife, doesn't cover the 911 story. They played the actual 911 phone call and edited out the claim that there was a young girl with a knife there. And that's why the police were called to the scene. So you have white on white crime, you have white on black crime, you have black on white crime, and you have black on black crime. And what these experts don't understand is that the police are getting called to these crimes, but they'll only report on the ones that sell money, that sell airtime. And that is if a white officer kills a minority, regardless of skin color, as long as they're a minority. So if you want to defund the police, that talk, it makes no sense, because the police aren't going out there looking to kill these people. They're getting called to these scenes because of the violence that's out on the street. And when they get there, as that camera showed from the neighbor and his body cam, he had 9 seconds. He got out of the car, walked to the sidewalk, and it was on. He had a gentleman kicking a young girl that was on the floor, another girl pulling a knife, lunging at another girl, and he had to act. So, Chris Cuomo, maybe you should look in the mirror and see what your decision would have been to try and protect that girl that was about to get stabbed. All right?
Yeah, we've talked about the media creating the narrative that fits what sells their people. But I was listening to the radio a few days ago, and a song by Bob Dylan called "Only a Pawn in Their Game." It was a classic rock song. I was raised on classic rock. But it got me thinking about our current political climate and how politicians and how they use the constituents for their game of chess. I mean, back in the 60s when this song was written, it was a sign of the times and how there was severe racial issues and how these so-called politicians used black people against white people to get what they wanted for their own gain, just like they're doing today, pitting every ethnic group against each other to get what they want. I mean, I don't know about you, Jack, but I'm tired of being a pawn in their game. I mean, they work for you and I, the constituents, and the only pawn should be them. Because they don't lead people, they divide. I don't even think we should call them representatives. And you were right, the sitting member of Congress, Maxine Waters, telling protesters to stay on the streets if they don't like the verdict outcome, that's totally wrong. That shows that they really think we're pawns in their games. And you said this congressman doesn't even live in Minnesota. She was flying back to California to be in her lovely home where there's no rioters.
She lives outside the district she represents too, by the way.
You know, with police presence. No one is going through her neighborhood trying to burn it down. I mean, if we don't wake up now, I believe this country is headed for disaster. These hacks, as you call them, are tearing down the ship. And we're people just sinking with it. I mean, we need to get these country back from these professed leaders. I think our new name for these hacks will be the dividers of Congress. They don't really care.
Yeah, I mean, you look at what Maxine Waters said on the streets. Does that sound like any kind of legislation based, or is that just on emotion? And whose emotion was she stirring up? She was stirring up that crowd.
And that's not the first time she did that, too. You know, look what she did, you know, when Trump got elected, about telling people to, you know, get in their faces and start problems back then. So she's part of the problem. I mean, these people don't really care about doing the right thing, the moral thing to do in politics, which comes down to integrity integrity, honesty, and being a real leader for the people. That's why we have to come together as one voice, one united team, so we can wake up these dividers of Congress to let them know that they have awakened a sleeping giant called the constituents.
Yes, the biggest political party we have, the constituent, has to start listening instead of reacting to what our leaders are saying. Tuesday, after the verdict came in, our fearless leader came out of his basement and spoke. And what he said continued to divide. It was a huge wedge on how this verdict still wasn't good enough. Could you imagine if this country had wisdom at its top that could unite this country in an event like this instead of divide? After the verdict, the man's going to spend the rest of his life in jail, and he continues to divide it. I mean, so the President of the United States, working on the emotion, he takes primetime TV to read off a monitor and spews nothing but division, because that's where his power comes from. He divides this country. The more division, the more power.
Right. So we're going to talk about Iran. So let's get into Iran and their chess game.
Yeah, that's a lot of information.
Yeah. You know, these problems over the last 20 years just didn't start. They've been here for a long time. And we'll get back into that in a second. But under each administration, under a Democrat administration, they try to do one thing. A Republican administration tries to do another thing. It's like a chess game, and it just pulls people the wrong way. They don't know what to do. This chess match is going on to continue forever and ever. I mean, when Republicans are in office, they're going to pull out of the nuclear deal. When Iran is in office, when the Democrats are in office, they're going to ease the sanctions on the Iranian officials. So it's never going to end. I mean, what I want to know is who gave these politicians the authority to send any money to an adversary? Who gave them permission to do what they're doing without the will of the constituents? I mean, I think these politicians believe we give them an open checkbook to give whatever money they want, where they want, and when they want to give it to people.
Well, you know, that comes through because, again, like we always say in the previous podcast and in these other shows, when you have a representative, whether Congress or Senate, to the federal government, and they worry about what they want to do, they shouldn't be making any votes until they come back to their constituents and see what their constituents want, how they feel about Iran, China, or Russia. But they don't. They don't even know our state legislators. We've told you about a local representative we have here. We asked him how many times has he heard from our federal representatives, and he has said none. Not once has our two senators or our Congress representatives come back to South Carolina and ask his opinion.
Yeah, we don't. They don't even get back to us when we email them. So, but we need people that want to work together to expand the deals of previous administrations. We can't have Republicans and Democrats keep changing the game, because that confuses not only us, the American people, but our adversaries. I mean, we feel we need to take a strong stance against regimes, especially ones that want to see us annihilated. And one of them is Iran. So this trouble with Iran and the United States began soon after World War II. It's part of the reason why we have no relations today. And during World War II, Iran was invaded by Russia. And at that time, the United States stood with Iran to force Russia to leave. So in 1953, duly elected prime minister was elected for Iran, and he nationalized Iran's oil. And the United Kingdom embargoed Iran's oil. And at that time, the CIA and British M16 removed the president of Iran and restored the Shah back to the throne. And over the next 25 years, we supported that regime, which was very highly unpopular. And even in 1977, President Jimmy Carter visited Tehran and believed Iranians were our friends. We don't believe his administration truly understood how Iran hated the United States. And in 1979, there were several uprisings that forced the Shah to leave, and the Iranian Revolution was established. And in that same year, 52 American hostages were taken at the U.S. Embassy and were in custody for 444 days. The new leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, supported taking the hostages by all the students at the embassy. The Carter administration attempted to rescue the hostages in April 1980, but failed. And that crisis put more strain on the relations for each country. And the hostages were never released until Ronald Reagan became president.
So, to go back a little bit, the Ayatollah is the supreme leader of Iran. And so what is an Ayatollah? That's a religious leader among Shiites, Muslims. And it's a title that is respected, especially for one who is not an imam, which is a ruler of the religion. So the Shah, he was the king, and the United States and Great Britain removed him, as Dennis said. And the reason they moved him was to go back even a little further, was during World War I, England had no fuel oil, and they changed their warships from steam to diesel-powered, and they quasi-colonized Iran and took their oil, and that was the beginning of BP, which is British Petroleum, and they had control over all of it. And when that freely elected prime minister from Iran was put into office by the people of Iran, he nationalized their oil and took the power away from England. And that's why England and the United States removed a duly elected prime minister from a sovereign country and placed in the king. Is that nerve? I mean, we're talking about how Russia tried to get into our election and change our presidents, and we're in an uproar. We literally did it. So, and the difference between a Shia and a Sunni is Sunnis believe that if you're educated enough, you can be the lead of the religion. And Shias believe you should be family. So when Muhammad died in the year 633 AD, the divide of that religion started then. So this revolution in that religion is over 1,300 years old, of who is right, the Shias or the Sunnis. And I do not believe that our modern leaders of this country have enough wisdom, brains, nerve to fix this problem. They can't fix what's going on in their own party, never mind what's going on in another country in their religion. And this is not just a private religion. This rules their government, their social, and trade. So their religion is their government, and it's unforgiving.
Yeah, we could talk about Iran for hours and hours, but we're just talking on certain parts that we feel are important. You know, in 1980, Iraq invaded Iran for a piece of land for enhanced access to the Persian Gulf. That war lasted 8 years, in which the United States and allies supported Iraq with military equipment, intelligence, and even financial. We did whatever we could to stop Iran from getting military equipment. And Iran suffered more than 500,000 casualties, and hundreds of thousands more people were injured. As you can see, they were devastated. And during the Reagan presidency, everyone knows we had the Iran-Contra affair in 1984, which Reagan authorized a secretive initiative to sell tanks and missiles to Iran in exchange to have them help secure the release of American hostages in Lebanon. This was in direct conflict to the administration's policy that the United States does not negotiate with terrorists or give aid to countries that support terrorism. Iran is one of those countries. I mean, there's so much information out there on the internet on what each president has done. And if you get the time, you should do the research because it's very interesting. I mean, we're just scratching the surface with this information. And Reagan did accept responsibility, but you can see where Iran started not trusting the American people, especially our leaders.
Yeah, well, some of this information I got from Al Jazeera right off the top, so you know where they lie on this. You know, that news agency is pure
hatred.
Middle East, Muslim, proactive. And they said, now Iran has these proxies that go into other countries, Hezbollah and these other names we could go on. They got a laundry list of proxies that they send out with arms, munition, plans, military guidance and training, and they attack our troops in Iraq. We've heard about that. So you ask yourself, how does Iran keep getting away with this? And here is the one simple reason why. We never solved the problem on Iran's sovereign property. So if they send a proxy to Iraq and attacks our boys and ladies in the military and cause injury to them, we engage over there. If they do it in Syria, all over the world, wherever these proxies go, Lebanon, we send our missiles over that way and our troops over that way. If the United States had leaders that weren't afraid to do their job the right way, again, remember, they have not declared war since 1942. So, because they're scared to lose their job. So if Iran's proxies are responsible for an event somewhere outside of their country, why are we not attacking Iran? And I'm not saying go there and start another ground troops, but we won't even touch their airspace. You know, why are we not cutting out any of their travel? Now, we had killed the leader of their military when Trump was there in Iraq. Again, it was in Iraq. So why did the United States not blow up that caravan? That man drove in a caravan while he was leaving Tehran, heading to the airport in Tehran. Blow him up on their sovereign ground. Wouldn't that make more sense? This man is leaving Iran to cause warfare and bloodshed on somebody else's country, and the United States doesn't attack him on his own property?
And look at all the criticism that Trump got for that from the Democrats.
Well, the critics, they're all responsible for it. You know, when they had the Marine base blown up during Carter,
Clinton.
No. Reagan. Thank you. That was Harry. Where did we retaliate? We had retaliated over there in Lebanon. I mean, why do we not retaliate in Iran? Why are we not holding them responsible? Why is the Ayatollah not having to explain to the Iranian people why United States might is landing in their backyard? You think that the citizenry of Iran would tolerate that for very long, or would they, again, get rid of their leadership? Maybe people of Iran said, why should we bother electing anybody? Because the United States and England are going to remove them anyway.
Right. You know, President George Bush came into office in 1989. I really couldn't find a lot about him relating to Iran. But what I did see, he pardoned 6 former officials in Reagan's administration relating to the Iran-Contra affair. No one will ever know if this was a cover-up, or no matter which way you look at it, it was very shady. Again, we trust our elected representatives to do the moral thing, to have integrity and be honest, and these people have none of them. They have no personal traits. But these problems with Iran have been going on for decades and decades. I mean, this country cannot allow Iran to make and have in its possession nuclear weapons.
Yet we keep pushing them further and further in that direction because we refuse to take care of this problem where the problem is, and that's inside the borders of Iran. If Iran started feeling the heat in their back door, let me tell you something. Every time they walk through a doorway, they'd be looking up, making sure that nothing's coming down on their head.
Yeah, that'd be good, right? That moves us up to the Bill Clinton administration. When Clinton took office, we had no diplomatic relations with the Iran Republic. His administration was part of a dual containment in the Gulf, which was Iraq and Iran. Iran supported terrorism, and we're trying to obtain nuclear capacity. And one of those terrorist organizations that Iran backed was Hezbollah. And during that administration, Iran was believed to kill 19 people in Saudi Arabia in 1996. However, Clinton did try to open up diplomatic relations during the second term, but Iran was not interested. When the Clinton administration had evidence that supported the Revolutionary Guard and Iran was responsible for the attack, in Saudi Arabia, the Iranian leadership disputed that evidence and stated Iran bears no hostile intentions toward America and poses no threat to the U.S. interests. So by the end of the Clinton presidency, there was little or no progress with diplomatic relations in Iran. And again, American diplomacy for the past, since Carter, has gone down the drains.
All right. I'm going to skip Obama, and I'm sure Dennis is going to go back to him because he was an idiot, and I don't want to talk about him. But I'm going to talk about the present occupant of the White House. So President Biden's administration is now trying to blame President Trump with all the problems he's having with Iran now. So here's just a few things, a few problems that Trump had with Iran and what the effects were on the U.S. So number one, Iran has a series of attacks on oil tankers through the canal. What's that canal called again, Dennis?
I'm not sure.
Suez Canal? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
So the effects on the United States is none, because when Trump was president, we were energy self-efficient. We were energy dependent. Second thing, we had Iran shot down a pilotless U.S. drone. Again, no loss of American life. It was a show of saber rattling on Iran. Number three, Iran strikes Saudi Arabia oil fields with drones and missile attacks, which showed the United States that their capability was a lot further advanced than we had originally thought. Again, no problem for the U.S. because we were energy self-reliant. All right? After a series of incidents inside of Iraq where Iranian-backed Shiite militants go back and forth with the U.S. forces, Trump sends a drone strike through the windshield of Iran's top military leader, General Qasem Soleimani, and sends him straight to hell. All right? I agree with that. Where it was done, I disagree. That man should have been killed on his way to Iraq, not on his way out of Iraq. He should have been killed in Iran on his way there. So, the effects on the U.S. and you know, after he did that, there was some. They hit a base in Iraq, and they did cause some injuries on that. So here's Biden trying to blame Trump after he gets rid of all Trump's policies on energy self-reliance. If any of these things happen under Biden now, we have a huge problem because our fuel oil is going to go up because we don't have we're not independently energy anymore, and we're going to pay for it. And again, like I said, money's money, but all of this just brings us right back to war in the sand and we losing the lives of our young soldiers. And we can't have that.
Yeah, I'm going to finish up on Biden. I had a couple things I want to say. But again, it's every administration blaming the last administration for the failures. But let's get back to George Bush, the second George Bush. He described Iran as an axis of evil in a State of the Union address, his first one after September 11th attacks. He believed that Iran was one of three terror states, along with Iraq and North Korea.